Hello.
All right, so are y'all feeling jealous, like some FOMO over here? I get to have a conversation with Alicia, and I want to start with asking you some quick questions about the census, because you really brought up important issues, and I know that when you got to the last thing and said that, you know, the thing that people mostly said is nobody ever asked us, I really felt that, because I feel that all my life, that, you know, we're always asked to respond to other people's issues. One of the things I'm curious about is, what do you say to folks that are black, that white folks that are like, well, are we supposed to just put black people's issues ahead of us, or black people's needs ahead of us, and sit on the sideline, or should we just get behind black people and disappear? What would you say to those folks?
All right, I'm going to answer this question. Black people's issues are your issues too. And I'm like,
Can we say that again?
Black people's issues are your issues too. And as long as we keep kind of doing this thing where we're like, well, I'm going to be in solidarity with black people, and I want black people to have luck with their movement, but that's not my movement, we're not going to win. We're just not going to win. So the majority of us in this country are struggling from a lack of access to the things that we need. But what we're advocating for here is not just to use white experience as the control by which we shape our campaigns, by which we understand our data and our statistics, and certainly by which we shape our outreach plans to get people activated and involved. We already saw that that was a losing strategy in 2016, and if we continue to do that in 2020, we will definitely see Trump in the White House for another few years.
So what can, for instance, we have all these candidates that are coming, what can they do to use the census in order to inform their campaigns and actually be able to speak to black people and all people in a way that's actually meaningful?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing they can do is actually use the census to shape their policy agendas. We have done the work of talking to tens of thousands of black people across the nation about what it is that we are experiencing in our economy, in our democracy, in our society. And so we're offering the information, but we're also going to be offering a policy agenda. Because what we know that we need to be analyzing candidates by is how close they are to our values, but also how closely they align to the agenda that we want to see them move. And we have to stop using candidates, using the lens of their personalities, right? Or how many fried chicken photos they took. So we want them to use this agenda and to use this information to better inform their campaigns about what it is that black communities care about. And then we actually want them to go and not just talk to black communities about it, but we want them to go to white communities too, and Latinx communities, right? And Arab and Muslim communities, and talk about the same thing.
So
You all right?
Yep.
I wish I had some water for you.
Yeah. Hey, somebody give me some water. No. So one of the issues I feel like is really, this is the Zen thing, this is where it comes in. One of the things that I feel like has really been present for me is we're in the 400th year.
Thank you.
Wow, magic, thank you so much. We are in the 400th year since black folks were brought over to this nation.
Yes.
And it is also the 50th year of the Manifesto for Reparations.
Yes.
So didn't you talk about reparations? Because I feel like that's in the zeitgeist, and people are kind of like, I want to talk about reparations, I don't want to talk about reparations. We see the black candidates like dancing around it. Have you talked about, did you talk to people in the census about
80% of the people who responded to our census said that they were in support of reparations for black folks. I think one thing that is important for us to acknowledge is that in order to dismantle systems like racism or patriarchy or etc., that we have to first acknowledge that they have created damage. And then we have to work to remedy that damage. I think what ends up happening with this conversation around reparations and people being very timid around taking it up is that I think people don't know how to wrap their minds around it. What does it mean, right? What does it mean? Some people think it's cash reparations, right? And some people are advocating for that. Some people think it's creating more equity in systems, right? And actually doing more investment on the back end to make sure that Black communities get our due. What I think is incumbent upon us all to be thinking about in relationship to reparations is not so much what is the method, but I think we actually have to start with the acknowledgement, the real and true and deep acknowledgement of the damage and the harm that has been done. Just 8 years ago, people were saying that racism is over because we elected a Black president. Right? So unless we're actually willing to deal with the reality of the devastation that chattel slavery caused in this country and that it continues to cause today, then we actually can't even get to the point where we start talking about, so what is the remedy for that? So I actually feel like we've got a lot of work to do in our movement, and candidates have a lot of work to do because, shoot, the last time I was here, candidates were even having a hard time saying Black Lives Matter. So how are they going to talk about reparations if they couldn't say Black Lives Matter?
So let's get like really close and personal.
Okay.
What do you say to the folks that are progressive, that are brown folks, and particularly white folks that are trying to understand how they fit in the conversation? Like, what is it that you think keeps people from being able to address reparations and even just be able to like hold it cognitively?
I think what keeps people from even addressing reparations is the shame. Mm-hmm. The shame of what this country has done, the shame that we are all connected to it in some way, shape, or form, and the shame of what it means to acknowledge that responsibility. Now, a lot of people will say things like, well, I wasn't alive then. It doesn't have anything to do with me. But the reality is, if you are still upholding systems that are keeping communities poor, without access to education, without health care, without housing, without wealth, then you are still perpetuating those systems. You are a part of the problem. If we were able to move past that shame and say, yes, I am deeply ashamed of this, and because I am deeply ashamed and I want to rid myself of this shame, I want to look squarely in the face at what needs to be done to remedy the harm that has been caused. Imagine that there is somebody that you love very deeply and you have hurt them. Something that you did hurt them. Do you look at them and say, let's just move on? Let's just move on.
Well, some of us do.
Or do you try and figure out, what can I do to get you to understand that, number one, I'm sorry. Number two, it won't happen again. And number three, tell me what we can do to restore back to when, to restore from the harm that has been caused. Lots of what we do is acknowledge that a thing happened, but we don't want to restore the harm.
Right.
And without restoration, the wound is still there. It's still there. You can't just say, I'm sorry, and keep doing the same thing over and over again, because eventually people will be like, you're not sorry.
Exactly.
Why do we keep having this conversation?
Right. So what do we do with the shame? Because it seems to me that, and I share the same sensibility and belief that the shame, which I think of as really a weapon of whiteness, right? In the way that the brother was talking about how working class white folks were separated from Black folks when they were all indentured servants. Mm-hmm. That shame is actually sort of built into the culture as a way in which to keep people silent, as a way in which people to, the way that I think about it is like, what else do you do when you see Black bodies for sale in a market? and you can't actually address it and you can't do anything about it. You have to put it someplace because we are meaning-making machines. And so shame has us like turn inward. It's actually what I say, like it's like a public expression. It's a public emotion. But what we do with that internally is it kind of turns in on ourselves. So what is the work that we have to do individually and collectively in order to work through what I think is this core thing, I'm not going way out to the folks that are, in the White House and that kind of thing, but I'm talking about folks that are in the room, folks that call themselves progressives, folks that believe in love and they believe in justice and they believe in redemption. What is it they have to do, would you say?
I think we have to figure out how to transform that shame into a deep and unabiding love for one another, which helps us show up when we are afraid to. My sister Jess talked earlier about how we don't keep turning away from concentration camps. We heard over and over again on this stage today that we have to keep showing up, and shame is the thing that keeps us from showing up. So we've got to be committed to transforming that shame into a deep and abiding love so that we can look and feel about each other like that lover that you just cannot get enough of. And even with that lover you can't get enough of, sometimes y'all got beef, right? Sometimes y'all got beef, but because that love is so deep, we keep turning towards each other. So that's what I'm advocating for. Continuing to turn towards each other and transform that energy not into like pity or navel gazing, but action. We have work to do, my people.
All right, y'all, you have your marching orders. It is time for us to turn our attention towards one another in love. Thank you so much, Alicia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your work that has changed the conversation about race in this country, that has changed the conversation about ourselves, and has brought us to a point in which we can actually begin to think about what it is that we need to do to move through this and turn toward each other as I turn toward you in love.
Thank you.
Thank you.